Sorry about that. So any given physics analysis of the 2 billion events will start looking at only about 1 per mil or 1% of these events. And these selections, there are about 800 of them, 800 independent selections that are done by, that are customized by the different physicists in the collaboration. And we run a single selection pass as a centrally run production job over this full DST. This thing takes about half a second per event again. And we only write out one or more, only those events selected by one or more of these 800 lines. So the output events are grouped in about 15 different independent files. And each of these streams select about 1 to 10% of the total sample. So if you're looking for a given one of these lines, you will look in one of these 15 streams for your events of interest. So depending on the stream, the data volume reduction is about 50 to 500, which means that for each stream, a physicist will have in the end to analyze a few terabytes of data, and this few terabyte can be replicated at several places because it's become a manageable data size. So this is the first time that somebody like Mitesh has access to the events. Everything before then is somehow locked into the data acquisition production system, and only the production can look at it because you cannot allow, we do not have the resources to allow all the physicists to look at these petabytes of data. The physicists have to prepare a selection, and then this is made available to them at this stage. There's also an important part of the analysis, as you already showed. I mean, there were some simulated events were shown earlier, is that we also simulate the collisions that happen in the collider. This allows us to study particularly our background. So we simulate the detector response to known physics processes, and we run it through the same pattern recognition trigger and so on, and event selection. And this allows us to understand our backgrounds in ways that we cannot understand with the real data. And simulation is also a very resource-intensive thing. So a simulation job requires about 2 minutes per event. So the LHC produces 40 million events per second. We can only simulate one or two per minute. But we take 2 minutes to simulate one event. But we do require several billions of these events to properly study our backgrounds. So this is just running continuously on about 20,000 CPUs worldwide. And each of these sort of bands here shows some computer center somewhere. And the big green thing here is resources at Yandex. So since the last year, we've been able to use Yandex to do some of the simulation. Forget this is an artifact of this step is not real. It's an artifact of the way this plot is done. But the cumulative percentage of resources here, the scale is from January to June this year. So in the first half of this year, 25% of the CPU cycles that were used for simulation of LHCb were run not in this building, but I mean in your data centers. So just a couple of words on the way this physics software is organized. So the software that does trigger, reconstruction, simulation. We basically have a framework which handles event input and output, and then the physicists write algorithms to do selections of events, reconstruct them, simulate them, and eventually analyze. So all the software is, because it's based on this framework, you can run the same software in each of these applications. So I have a slide here of the Gaudi framework, which is what all our software is based on. I don't want to go into details here, but basically this is where physicists write algorithms, and then the framework takes care of everything else, which is accessing data files, making histograms, storing them, and so on. And you just plug in algorithms here when you're preparing a physics analysis, a physics selection. So then I move on to the computing model. So how do we handle these resources? So at CERN, we generate the raw data. So this is where the experiment is running. And we can, on the CERN computers, we can run reconstruction, simulation, user analysis, but we tend to concentrate the CERN resources to do a bit of each, so that people can do debugging of their software in an environment where they have some control. And then we have a set of computer center that we call tier ones, which are in Italy, in Germany, in France, in Holland, in Spain, in the UK. There are negotiations going on to have one in Russia as well, where we distribute the raw data, some part of it, to each of these sites. The raw data is reconstructed on these sites. It is stripped on these sites, and then it is stored on disk on these sites. So physicists' analysis jobs can run on one or more of these sites, depending on where the data is. And the physicist doesn't have to know. We have some software which hides this structure. The physicist submits the job to the grid, and the machinery behind makes the job go where the data is. And I want to stress that in our model right now, data is more or less static somewhere. We can manually replicate it, but it's the jobs that go to where the data is residing. And then there are many other resources. These are so-called tier twos that do not have much disk storage, and which are in our system are dedicated essentially to simulation, which does not have any input. So you can run a job, you can send a job anywhere, on a cloud, on a desktop PC, on a Yandex data center that doesn't know anything about the LHC data. You just send everything you need to run your job, and all you need is that the output can then be uploaded back to some computer center. So this grids can be several different ones. They can be clouds, they can be dedicated resources, are hidden to users by something called Dirac, which is a system which has been built by LHCb. The other experiments have something similar. In fact, the main proponent of this system is here in the audience. It's Andrei, another eminent Russian in the collaboration. So this Dirac thing is an abstraction which allows the user community to use the grid in a transparent way. And one of the main components of Dirac is a workload management system. Users submit jobs to the central task queue of Dirac. Dirac knows about resources it has access to and sends tiny, what we call pilot jobs, agnostic things that just go there and see what's available, what resources are available, how much memory is available, how much disk and whatever. And then depending on whether this facility is available for doing some work, it interrogates the task queue and fetches some jobs which are suitable for that resource. So this is essentially a batch system, which is managing this task queue and dispatching data to the different sites. Now, I've done no justice to this, and if you want details, you should really discuss with Andrei. And then, well, Dirac also has a large number of user interfaces to interact with the system, to find the status of the system, and so on. Another topic I wanted to cover is data replication. So I've already mentioned, so raw data is produced at CERN and it's dispatched to some of the tier ones. So in the end we have one full copy of the raw data at CERN, and we have a distributed copy of the raw data in the other 6 sites, tier 1 sites. The reconstruction program runs on that raw data either at CERN or on the tier 1 sites and produces one copy of this full DST, which is stored on tape and which is distributed around the tier 1 site. So we do not have on disk a replica of the full raw or of the full DST data. This is data which is really just read only a few times ever in its lifetime, and it's done in organized ways whenever we decide to reconstruct that data, for example, or restrip that data. So once we have this full DST, we run this stripping and streaming software that I mentioned, and here you can make various stream DST files on the tier 1s. You merge them into larger files, and then, so this is the data sets that the physicists look at, and these data sets can be replicated as many times as is efficient for the analysis. So typically we do it 4 times. We put it on 4 different sites, so if some sites are too busy, the jobs will just go to a different site. And this data is entirely on disk. So this data is accessible essentially in real time. You don't have to wait for it to be recalled from tape. Our data sets are organized, so our events are organized in files. So a file typically, for raw data, for example, a file typically contains 60,000 events. And the data management operations to replicate, remove replicas, delete files, and so on are all done through the Dirac software. So the data is described on the Dirac side, is described in terms of logical file names, which talk about how the data was produced. So which jobs reconstructed it, and what type of data it is, whether it's raw data, a full DST, so these are stored on tape, whether it's a DST and this is stored on disk. There's a hierarchical namespace, but essentially we have a logical file name and then a catalog which maps these logical file names onto real storage. The users don't care of anything of this. They don't want to know any of these details. For a user, what you care is a data set, and a data set is a collection of events which were collected in the same data taking condition, that were all processed in the same way by the same versions of the software, so that you can analyze them as one coherent entity. So I have a couple of slides that describe how we make this mapping between logical files and real files. I'll skip these just for brevity, but we can come back to them if you're interested. What I wanted to concentrate on, we have here we have a catalog which is telling us where to send jobs to analyze a given file. So this is saying a given file from a logical file name exists on a number of disk storage on different sites. Then we have a bookkeeping catalog which contains all the metadata which is interesting for physicists to locate their data sets they're interested in. So user selection criterion can be, for example, the origin. Is it Monte Carlo data? Can I have all the data taken in 2012 by the detector? I want to take, or conditions of data taking. So, for example, I want to take all the data that's ever been taken at 4 TeV, or with a given magnet polarity. I can choose on which reconstruction pass, which stripping pass I want to analyze with. Usually you want the latest and greatest, but sometimes your particular selection only happened in an earlier stripping, so you have to select files that belong to an earlier stripping. For simulation, you want to be able to select files which will contain events which were produced in a given, which contain a given type of events that you're interested in studying. And then finally, what type of files, so which stream, in fact, you want to work with. And you can search the bookkeeping for any of these, or if you know a file name, you can find out what it belongs to. So this bookkeeping is much more of a data set catalog. It actually tells you the full provenance of the files and the jobs. It's a relational database with two tables, files and jobs. And jobs belong to productions belong to a processing path, and with given origin and conditions. And it's highly optimized. The tables are highly optimized to search for files. There is another attribute that these files have, which are a quality flag. So you can either right from the start or later realize that some of the data you took had some problem with it. One of the subdetector was not working correctly, and you can flag this with a flag, and then you can make selections of files which have a given quality flags. So we have some interfaces that allow us to browse these things on the web, and to select lists of files, and even to produce the configuration files that allows them to tell an analysis job where to find the data. So another interesting thing, so up to now we were only looking at the bookkeeping only allows you to select events to select files. You can only select 100,000 events at a time. Something that might also be interesting is to have a more fine-grained indexing of events, where you can select events that contain specific global event information, like the number of tracks or the number of energy calorimeter clusters, or whether they fired a given stripping or trigger line. And so this is the development that you will see later that Andre did when he was at CERN, and which is I found it very interesting. Some people are using it or have tried to use it. It's still a bit of a prototype level, but it's certainly something that could be developed further. I'll skip this. This is talking about how we stage files from tape and how we optimize the access of files, data from tape. In this data management area, we have quite a lot of work that needs to be done. Our constant problem is that we don't have sufficient disk to store all these events, or to store as many events as the physicists would like to have. And although disk is getting cheaper, buying it for this distributed environment is more a political thing than a commercial thing. And so we have to be clever at how we handle the data on the disks. And in particular, we have to work on data set popularity. So with Dirac, we are able to record how often a given data set has been requested, how often a given file has been analyzed. And we can count number of files used per data set per day or per week, for example. So once we have this information, we could assess the popularity of a given data set. We need to find metrics for measuring popularity. It's probably not just how many times a file was touched. It's probably more sophisticated than that. And then, based on this, take decisions on the number of online replicas that we have to have. If a data set is only accessed by one guy once a year, then you might as well just give that file to him in his lab, and you don't need to keep it on the grid. If all the physicists in LHCb are accessing all the files every day, then you probably 4 copies is probably a lower limit of what you would like to have for efficiency reason. So based on the information you collect here, you can make more intelligent distribution of the data given the disk space that we have. some longer-term challenges. The static tier model that we built our computing model with, so with a central CERN site that distributes data to tier ones, and the tier ones are the only places where we have this storage, was designed at a time 10 years ago where network performance was not what it is today. And the evolution of networks allows us to have data access in a much more dynamic way. We can move files around, but we can also access data remotely. And this can certainly is something that is evolving in all of the LHC experiments, and there's work to be done here. Currently, because we have these completely independent events organized in files, what we do is we send a job to some CPU, and we run a sequential analysis of a file, a complete file, on one CPU. This works very well on single core or two core machines where you can have sufficient memory per job to analyze the data. In a multi-core, in a highly multi-core machine, due to memory limitations, the jobs require sort of in excess of 2 gigabytes of memory per process. And you have to find ways of optimizing this event processing, and probably the model of one file per job is no longer valid. We also have to learn more to work with virtualization, with clouds. At the moment, the scheduling on the grid is done. You request a CPU, you get a CPU, you send the job to that CPU. It would make more sense to be given a whole node. We tell you you have a node. This node has 24 cores, and do what you want with them. We charge you for 24 cores, and you do what you want with those 24 cores. Nico has already mentioned the upgrade in 2018. So for the computing point of view, into the readout farm, into the high-level trigger farm is mentioned, you will have a factor of 40 more events going in, and the output rate is going to be between 4 and 5 times what it is now, so 20 kilohertz. And the event size of the raw data is likely to be bigger. So basically, this translates in something like a 10 times increase in the data rate that has to be processed offline. And this implies that if we do nothing, it implies running 10 times more jobs. So all of the Dirac workload management and data management system have to scale. All these data catalogs have to scale. We may want to invent new ideas, find new ideas for doing the data mining. Instead of being just brute force looking at all the events, we might want to somehow classify them fast and do some data mining on some reduced information. And one last thing I wanted to put on my last slide is that is a hot topic right now is data preservation and open access. All that you've seen up to now is funded with public money. And there is pressure from funding agencies to tell particle physics, just like it happens in other fields like astronomy or human genome or whatever, to make this data available for analysis by other experts, so other particle physicists, and maybe also the general public. So we have to find ways to make this mass of data manageable and analyzable by people who are not necessarily experts of our detector and understand our systematics and so on. This is a huge challenge both for the physicists who have to make this data usable for people who don't necessarily know enough. They have to decide, first of all, what kind of data they want to make usable. But it's also a computing challenge because we have to understand how to give access to this data to the general public. That's one point. The other point is that even if we keep this data private to LHCb, LHCb, if the upgrade goes through, will be alive for another 10 years or so. And when we start looking at data at a new energy or at a new intensity, we may want to compare it to data that we took 2 years ago. I mean, we already have data that we took 2 years ago at different energies, and that if you asked me today, how do I analyze that data, I would not be able to point you to some documentation that tells you how to analyze that data. We would be able to reconstruct the information by talking to people and looking at mail archives and whatever, but the documentation of how to access that data is already being lost. So this is, again, if we need to find ways to document our analysis and to preserve our software, software that ran 2 years ago on some Linux kernel, which has to be running in 10 years' time on the Linux kernel that's going to be available in 10 years' time. Okay, so I think that was my last slide.
Okay, thank you, Marco.